This is what you want. This is what you get. This is what you
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all. So say we all.
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
We are back in 5, 4. Now, here's Mr. Midnight, Jack Darrow.
Oh, good evening, night owls, and thank you for allowing me into your living rooms once again. Well, night owls, we've got a heck of a show in store for you tonight, and I'm very excited for you to see it all unfold before your very eyes. I really hope you love it. Gosh, I hope you love it. Please love it. Love it. I'm trying to host a nationally syndicated talk show.
And I'm trying to help you keep it on the air.
We all know how important it is to keep our sponsors and affiliates happy, but in my humble opinion, there is only one person who really matters in this whole darn crazy business. And that is you, our viewer.
You're meddling with things you don't understand.
Whoa! Now, as you know, here on Night Owls, we think it's very important to keep an open mind. Please welcome Dr. June Ross Mitchell and Lily, the young subject of the book, Conversations with the Devil.
I really don't think it's a good idea, Jack. She's becoming more unpredictable.
That's a good thing. That's why we still do live TV. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for a live television first as we attempt to commune with the devil.
Lily, can you hear me?
Good to see you again, Jack.
Lily, return to me.
This isn't about ratings anymore.
No one's going anywhere.
How could you let it happen, Jack? How could you let it happen?
Please be warned, anyone with young children in the room. What you're about to see
You okay, Jack?
is profoundly disturbing and shocking.
You get out there, Mr. Midnight. And you knock him dead.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Permone, and today we are going to talk about 4 relatively newish horror films that I've seen this year. We are going to begin with Late Night with the Devil, which is probably the oldest of the 4. This is a sort of found footage video kind of movie with such great surprises. And we then go to In a Violent Nature, which could best be categorized as a slasher film, but it does something very innovative that I was very surprised by in the manner that the movie develops. Then we jump over to A Quiet Place Day 1, which I would consider to be a more traditional kind of a sci-fi horror film. It's a sequel. It's the 3rd film in the series. The most Hollywood, if you will, of all of the films that we talk about. And then we wrap up with Longlegs. Again, another crazy horror film that just absolutely blows you away in terms of the performances and the shocking nature, if you will, of the storyline and the manner in which that story is presented to us. So, let's begin with Late Night with the Devil.
What did I teach you?
You fought the Duke of New York. You're a number 1.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you.
Can you dig it?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
That spawn of Satan.
Oh, really?
The Force will be with you, always.
Today's first film is going to be Late Night with the Devil. This is a movie that came out early this year. I started catching little bits and pieces of Facebook articles having to do with some pre-screenings, some film festivals that were, rumbling around the country, some of them international, actually, and a certain amount of buzz started to develop around this film. The big one was probably when Stephen King gave it a quick little, very positive review about, how creative and inventive this film was, which is usually, a big get, if you will, for a small independent film to get like that kind of a endorsement. As a matter of fact, I believe it actually made it into some of the different posters they had for the film, to put his quote. And that's something that used to be done a lot more, I think, where a film would come out and part of the advertising of the film would be, especially back when newspapers were the thing, and you would see, in print, the ad for the film, and you would have all these different movie reviewers, for example, saying good things about a film and trying to get that good review. This way you can then publish it. But this is one that's exactly what happened. So as far as I'm concerned, the first thing was the fact that it was a horror film having to do with a broadcast. And that's something that it's always kind of been an interest of mine, if you will. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but for example, a movie like Videodrome, if you guys remember, a movie like They Live, that has to do with somehow broadcasts enabling or being manipulated in some shape or form for evil reasons. Now, to take a step back here, I've been on a horror kick for a while now. And this is one of those things that I've been going, searching and streaming and trying to find, all of these, not only classical horror films, but little known films. Every time I see an article on Facebook that says, top 10 horror films you might have never have seen, or top 5 streaming right now on Shudder, something like that, I always pop it up and save it because I want to see if there are any films on that list that I haven't seen yet that I might be missing out on something. And I think I'm pretty good so far. I don't think I've missed any major film. Fangoria magazine, as a matter of fact, recently put out a poster that you could buy that has, I think, the top 100 best horror films. Little poster size frames on the poster. And I started going through them one by one. I'm like, okay, I see them. And out of the 100, there might be maybe 3 or 4 that I haven't seen. So when this movie finally came out, I was chasing it. I wanted to go see it right away. Unfortunately, the area that I live, and I might have already told you guys the story, is that we used to have 3 movie theaters here within, I would say, 10-15 minutes from where I live. They were all part of what's considered to be the Villages, this area in Florida, where I happen to work. And it was great. 3 theaters, at least 8 films per theater. You could see just about everything up to a certain point. Once COVID hit, 2 of those theaters closed down. Actually, theoretically, they all closed down. Only one was able to reopen. The other 2 either permanently closed or they're converting them into another sort of business. So they only kept 1 theater. So when you have a movie like this one, and again, this is especially troublesome when it comes to independent horror films, smaller cut type of films, you're not going to get them in this area. This is a very specific demographic. Look it up if you are bored. So your big films will hit here. They will be playing here in our lone theater. But when you're looking for these little independent things, it's not going to work. You're going to have to find them somewhere else. So what I have to do is I have to either travel 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes north or a little bit southeast east. I can go up to Ocala, or I can go down to Leesburg. There's a couple of big chain theaters in those two areas. And if you really, really are looking for something special, you go to Orlando. That's a little over an hour away, more or less. So that's the layout. Now, the local theater that's still open now, a couple months ago, I think it was late last year actually, converted from a Villages, branded theater into an Epic theater. So it's now run by a completely different company. But still, the selection of films are pretty much the same as they were before. You have your big films, you have your, targeted to the older demographic, conservative demographic, if you will, of this area. So you are going to find some of these weird kind of like, what the hell movie is this? But not if you're looking for horror, this isn't the place to find it, under normal conditions. Unless it's a big, big film. Anyway, I don't remember exactly where. I think I might have gone to Ocala for this one. So I went and saw it in Ocala. I took my wife, and she kind of sat through it because she's not a big horror fan, but it was an opportunity to go see something a little different. So we did. One of the things that sticks out right off the bat, that screams at you, independent film, is the fact that there were so many production companies, distributors, you name it. All these little companies that ponied up the money, I guess, to make and distribute the film. While I was watching it, I counted 7 different slates that came up in order. I'm not sure if there were more. Some people might claim there's a couple more here or there, but it is a big, big amount of companies, ponying up the money to be able to put this movie together. The basic plot of the movie is that this is the late 70s, and you are watching a couple of videotapes, if you will, that were put together to tell a story of a late night television talk show. Kind of like a second, third tier type of show. Their biggest competitor, yes, is Johnny Carson. Everybody is, that's the biggest competitor. The film takes place in New York City because, again, in the 70s, you had a lot of those type of shows being shot in New York City, even though the film was actually shot in Australia. But the thing about the movie is that it's supposed to be about how something crazy happened, and we're going to watch the videotapes, behind the scenes footage and that kind of stuff of the events of that night. Ooh, scary, scary. Okay. So in a way, you could say this is a found footage film genre. And it is. It is a found footage genre type of film, horror film. The movie starts off with a little bit of a documentary style clip reel, giving you the backstory of who this main television host, Jack Delroy, who hosts a show called Night Owls with Jack Delroy. He is played by David Dastmalchian. I've seen him, and you guys probably have, in many, 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 many films. Usually he's kind of like a bit player. I do remember him from The Dark Knight. I do remember him from Ant-Man, from The Suicide Squad. He was Polka Dot Man. He has done a ton of stuff. Again, he was in Dune, the new Dune. He was in Blade Runner 2049. A lot. Let's just put it this way. He's done a lot of stuff. And this is probably, I would say probably his first leading role of I don't want to say major film, because this is an independent film, but this film got a lot of traction. So he's the host of the show, and during the opening kind of documentary, we are told that what's going on here is that, he's been chasing the number 1 slot for a while now, and he got, pretty hot with the ratings, but he never could quite catch up to the Carson ratings. And he signs an extension on his contract for, I forget how many more years, but bad luck strikes. His wife gets sick, and after a while she dies, which kind of sends him into a sort of a depressive kind of leave of absence that he takes from the show. So now you fast forward, it's 1977, he's back from this leave of absence, and this is what happens that particular night, which is Halloween night. During that opening documentary, you also find out about his background in terms of I think he used to be a radio guy who switched over, and he's also a member of like a men's club kind of thing that has to do with his work, where they go on these retreats out in California for like wealthy and connected people, and they do all kinds of rituals having to do with being part of this club. And that's when the little red flags start going up. But anyway, the movie itself takes you through the show. And the way that they work it out is that you're watching the videotape of the show. You're watching the 3-camera shoot. You see the cameras change angles, just like you were watching a late night talk show. And what also happens during the movie is that you got these intercut scenes where all of a sudden everything changes to black and white. I think you might have also a slightly different aspect ratio. It changes a little bit. And you're listening and watching the behind the scenes conversations that are happening as people are reacting to what's going on. And then at a certain point later in the movie, when things go completely haywire, there's a third kind of point of view, which is a true film point of view. You get the whatever aspect ratio the film was shot in. It looks nice and crisp, as opposed to the slightly video hazy look of the majority of the film. So they do a little game with the film stock. I mean, it's all done in post-production. From what I read, they thought about the possibility of shooting it on purpose, at a low quality, but they figure, you know what, let's just shoot it right. And then in post, we will adjust to the effect that we want. One of the things that we learn in the beginning also is that his main guest during this episode, aside from some other guests, his regular kind of guests that he has, a mentalist, an ex-psychic debunker kind of person, a woman, a psychologist, I think, that's treating this girl who was recovered from a cult and what she went through. She's going to talk about the book, all these things. And we get to see these, again, during the documentary feature of the beginning of the film, we get to see like shots of all these different events that you could say, okay, they're like archival footage. Obviously it's recreated, or it's stock footage from other events that it's used for the movie purposes. It kind of builds this whole background of what you're about to jump into. Now, at the time, I didn't realize this until later, but the narrator in the beginning that's narrating this documentary, and it's narrating to the audience, it's Michael Ironside, which is one of my favorite cult actors. If you guys remember, my big three were Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen, and Michael Ironside. And his voice, oh my God. I mean, I always forget the fact that he's had a huge career as a voice artist on top of being an actor. And the older he's gotten now, his voice is so much raspier and, kind of scary voice that he has. And if you don't realize it's him, it's kind of funny when you do realize it. It's like, oh my God, it's Michael Ironside. It's a great intro to this whole film. The sets are wonderful. I mean, it's all very browns and yellows and like kind of like a dirty orange, all these 70s looking colors, the clothing, it's done so well. You're going to love it. One of the things that they mentioned early, which is your hint of where we're heading, and as I mentioned it a little bit ago, is that this men's club that he used to belong to used to meet at a place called The Grove. And apparently, that's where they would do these events called owl ceremonies, which is a kind of like, you're joining this men's club and you got to perform certain things, to join it. The way that things timed out is, as I said earlier, his wife gets sick, and then the following year, after being away for a few months is when he returns. And that's when he decides, with his producer seems to be a pretty swarmy kind of guy, that they have to kind of change the direction of the show a little bit more, make it more controversial, be less of a straight talk show and more of a sensational kind of guests, and that's where you get onto all of this supernatural type of stuff. And the way that it's presented to us is that you're watching the master tape and the unreleased footage of what took place that night. The opening of the show itself is it's so 70s. It reminds me of so many of the shows that I didn't necessarily used to watch when I was young in the 80s, let's say, which was like leftover 70s. But I remember something like Joe Franklin, these low tier, and I know it's insulting, but it's a low tier talk show types. You know, not the top tier, not the Carson, not the Letterman, not the Leno, but the very local kind of a syndicated, non-national, very local entertainers kind of feel to it. However, a lot of the mannerisms, and I know that, the directors, there's two directors, Colin and Cameron Cairns. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Because they're from Australia, they modeled the Delroy character after a well-known, long ago Australian talk show host. But even and granted, again, it's not supposed to be Australian, it's supposed to be American. But when you watch Desmachian's acting and his mannerisms and his gestures and the way that he stands and the way that he reacts, you can see so much of, in my case, I see Carson and Letterman. There's so much of Carson and Letterman in his performance. It's just fantastic. Now, one of the things that I focused on at one point was when they're showing you like the audience, there's one specific audience member dressed as a skeleton with a skeleton mask and a skeleton costume, and he's perfectly still, not reacting to much, and every now and then you get a shot of him. And throughout the whole film, I was always expecting that particular character to, at some point, jump out and do something. But he didn't. I believe he was red herring. He was there just to throw you off the scent. Right before the movie opened, there was a slight controversy having to do with the use of AI. You got to remember that this movie came out right around the end of the Hollywood strike, the writer's strike, and one of the contested aspects of the strike had to do with the usage of AI. Well, in this film, apparently from what I read, they experimented with AI to create the slates of the, we'll be right back or welcome back to blah, 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 whatever. And there was one specific one that people realized it was AI because there's a art of a couple of, I think it's like a skeleton kind of welcoming people back, kind of like waving or something. And they realized that the fingers, I think there was too many fingers in the hand. And the directors of the film said, yeah, we wanted to experiment and see how it would work if we can, do the slates in that manner. So that was a little bit of a blip right before the movie came out that was a little bit unexpected. But again, the success of the film for what it is. Again, we're not talking blockbuster here, but we're talking about, for an independent film, very low budget, this did modestly well. One of the little Easter eggs, I guess, if you will, has to do with Carl Haig, which is the ex-psychic that is there to debunk other psychics. And he talks about how he went and studied the Amityville house to investigate what was happening, and that the Warrens declined an invitation by him. And by the Warrens, they're talking about that couple that I think they both died already, but all the movies having to do with like the original Annabelle films, and I believe it's the Conjuring films. There's I forget how many, 4 or 5 of them, about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the psychics who investigated all these different alleged incidents, supernatural incidents. But anyway, it's funny how they kind of drop a name in there in the middle of it. Now, the backstory of the girl, whose name is Lily, who is the one that's being brought in as a guest to the show to talk about what happened to her in that cult. The documentary tells us that she was rescued in 1971 from this cult. And now it's 1977, but because the previous year, 1976, is when apparently they were studying her, and all of a sudden she manifested this demon like inside of her or something, and that's what caused the other psychologist in the guest list to write a book about her and bring her on the show. And that psychologist's name is June. And it is kind of implied that Jack and June might have a relationship. There is something between those two. She's doing him a favor, but it almost hints that there's a little more going on there than just a favor. At least that's how I read it. The first person that they bring on to show, like, you know, show off his powers is a character named Christo. He's kind of like a Karnak, kind of. Again, if you remember Carson, he's a mentalist, and his demonstration kind of goes south at one point. At first, you know, it doesn't work. Then it kind of works, but then it kind of works too well. And eventually he leaves, and we find out that he apparently died on the way to the hospital. He was having some kind of a aneurysm or something. The character that Lily describes as the demon is named Mr. Wiggles, which is a little bit of a callback to The Exorcist. If you guys remember, the demon that Linda Blair's character describes as Captain Howdy, there's your Mr. Wiggles as far as I'm concerned. You know, they're kind of connecting those, you know, it's an homage, if you will. Now, when things start to go crazy in the studio, some of the crew and much of the audience start to leave the show before things go really out of control. The movie gets to a point where what you have is, like, I like to believe it's like the Carrie moment, where the girl is in complete demon mode, if you will, and whoever's left is going to get it, and you do get it, and this is why this is an R-rated film, because they do go into certain violent, gory kind of scenes. When we start to see, like, Jack's point of view, which is what I was mentioning earlier, was that we jump from the videotape, we jump to the behind the scenes black and white, and then we jump to what Jack is now seeing, whether it's a hallucination or it's real, but we get even a different aspect ratio, which is here where the quality of the stock also changes. There's apparently many, and I saw a few, but there's apparently many little hidden shots throughout the movie where you do see the ghost image of his wife. You know, we do see it at one point, but even earlier on, there's little drips and drabs of her image appearing on different items. And it is also hinted, I believe, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, I think, that him signing that contract and him getting access to all of these company retreats and perks and success and extensions of his contract and all that other stuff, that is probably that deal with the devil that he makes, whether he knew it or didn't know it, that resulted in his wife dying. This is definitely a movie that I recommend. Currently, it's streaming in Shudder. If you have Shudder, that's where you could find it. There is a crazy super deluxe edition coming to DVD and Blu-ray. I already pre-ordered it. Can't wait for this one to come out. I'm sure it's going to be jam-packed, and I've seen what it comes with. Tons and tons of materials, interviews, and that sort of thing. I can't wait. This is the kind of film that uses the subgenre of the found footage, you know, the video found footage subgenre of horror in a completely new manner. Now, granted, I'm sure there's going to be a movie somewhere out there that might be similar, or it kind of tries to do the same thing, or it's a similar plot or something like that. This is the first time I've seen something like this, and it's really, really good and entertaining. And it's one of those type of films that I'm like, okay, well, now let's go backwards. Let's figure out what these two directors have done before. From what I've seen, it's very small stuff. This is their big hit, and we'll see how they catapult from this movie to something else next, most likely something with a bigger budget or attached to an actual studio. But this is a great little, like a Friday night, especially like watch it on Halloween night type of film. The low budget aspect of the film makes it work even better. It fits the cheesiness of the television studio and all that stuff. I cannot recommend it enough. For our second film, we are going to look at In a Violent Nature. granted, as I said before, that I am in a horror kick lately, this is not the type of film I would watch. And part of it is because of the fact that, to me, and it's funny because I like horror films, but I like smart horror films. I like films that are different. And the subgenre of slasher really, no pun intended, has been done to death. They're almost all the same film. The innovative ones, the ones that stick out, are your, obviously your Halloween. You could even say Friday the 13th, the first one, because then it was completely repetitive afterwards. The one that kind of changed things a little bit, and it gave it a fresh perspective a while back, was Scream, which spawned its own insane franchise, just like all the other ones. But this one, In a Violent Nature, for some reason, was being advertised as it getting a very good Rotten Tomatoes score. Now, if you're pro or anti Rotten Tomatoes and how those aggregator reviews work and how the actual numbers are crunched, I mean, that's a whole other subject. But it's still interesting, if somebody says this is a movie that has 100% or 90% or 85% or something like that, it's worth, to me at least, taking a look at. So as this movie kind of chugged along and it's coming and it's coming and it's coming, and again, the reviews were pretty good. So I was like, well, what could be different about this? It's just, it sounds like just another slasher film. The trailer was interesting. The trailer gave you a taste of kind of what you're looking at. And it seemed to be what was advertised, or not advertised, but what was talked about as a film that is from the killer's perspective, as opposed to the victim's perspective. But what I found was something completely different in terms of, to me, the killer's perspective would have been the point of view, almost like you're playing a video game. I mean, that's been done too. It's been done that, you see all of a sudden the camera is the POV of the killer. Okay, I get that. I mean, obviously nobody's done an entire film with that POV. And that POV is also it's been used so much, and it's usually a slightly different angle or a different type of lens that they use so that you can differentiate between the good guy's point of view as opposed to the bad guy's point of view, as opposed to the audience's point of view. But anyway, we're getting in the weeds here. This one, on paper, it sounds very typical, and it is very typical. It's a bunch of kids in the woods camping in a cabin, and they awaken accidentally a spirit out in the woods that manifests into this man who's going around killing everybody. And one by one, you start to lose your characters. The killer kills all these characters, and you're left with, again, typical slasher film, the final girl. And then you see the final girl as to how the movie concludes. And the movie is accented by the innovative kills, if you will. Now, again, this is the language or the territory of the slasher film. There is it's a whole other world. It's a whole other dynamic. And it's funny because at the same time as I watch this film, I am currently reading My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I'm shocked that it hasn't been made into a film yet. And it's about a kind of like a murder mystery. A slasher is on the loose, but the protagonist, she is a super crazy slasher movie fan. And the book is riddled with references to all the slasher films and all that kind of stuff, and the history and the rules. Again, brings you back to Scream a little bit, which is what Scream did. It highlighted the rules of the slasher film. And this film plays with that a little bit. Same problem as before that I mentioned on the previous film, Late Night with the Devil. Want to see this film? Definitely not a local presentation around here. So I figured, all right, well, I'm going to have to go a half hour north or a half hour southeast. No, if it wasn't playing either on my Ocala or my Leesburg theaters. The closest to seeing this movie would have been Orlando, somewhere around Orlando. So I kind of passed on it at first in terms of, oh man, I just don't want to go all the way out there just to see a slasher film. It's like, geez, I'm going to regret this. Anyway, the film kept gathering steam and good reviews and this and that. So I said, screw it. I'm going to just rent it. I watched it on Amazon Prime as a rental. And boy, was I surprised at how good it was. And again, it's the type of thing that if I describe it to you, as far as the plot, it is your typical, you could not get more typical in terms of the plot. It does what it needs to do, based on the slasher tropes. However, this is a film that's, first of all, it's beautifully shot because it's all, I wouldn't say so much point of view of the slasher, but it's more point of view almost as if a documentary crew is following the slasher. It's a different animal altogether. There are scenes, obviously, where you kind of step away from that point of view and you go to traditional shots of people talking or anything like that. But when you are in that mode, most of the film, you don't see the guy's face. Again, in typical slasher form, there is a scene where you see his face, but it is not the type of scene that you would have predicted for a typical slasher. The typical slasher film, the reveal of the face is usually as a result of some fight that the slasher is having with the final girl, and she rips his mask or his hood or whatever the hell he's wearing. You're like, it's the reveal. It's horrible, that kind of thing. And then he kind of usually puts the mask back on, or that's the end of the movie when she kills the bad guy, whatever. But no, here, there's a scene where he removes his mask. And by the way, part of the film, he's not wearing a mask, so you don't see him. It's always from behind that we see him. Later in the film, he adopts a mask, and it's an old-timey firefighter, like really old-timey mask. It's very distinctive. It's very iconic now. It's his mask. I could picture now this is a character that I'm sure somebody's going to start making them in collectible action figure form and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that it is a firefighter mask kind of dovetails into the story itself, because it's supposed to be this is this kid that was like special needs and people kept making fun of him or whatever. And then at one point they told him to go climb that fire tower because there's some toys there waiting for you. And there were some other people there waiting to scare him. And as a result of him being scared, he fell and died, crashed in the ground. So there is the firefighter link. Now, granted, this is all taking place, in the woods where there's cabins and that sort of thing. And at one point he does go into a kind of like a fire warden cabin where they have all these displays of older firefighting equipment, and he grabs that particular mask. I can't really tell you if that's the timing wise, if that would have been the mask that he wore, but according to the story, that we learned through other people's narratives, this kid, more like an adult at this point, a very big guy with a very simple mind. After his death, he came back. Somehow he came back and started killing people, and then they figured out a way of kind of killing him, because he's the typical guy that, you hurt him and he comes back. But this is like the second time, because it's all triggered by something stupid that the current batch of campers do. One of them steals or picks up a pendant, like a necklace type of thing that I guess belonged to his mother or something. It doesn't really matter. The point is that is the trigger. That is what starts the whole ball rolling, apparently, again. Once again, when you look at the film, it has the check marks. The kills are original. There is one particular kill that they warned everybody about, and the rumor was that some people couldn't handle it. They had to walk out. That's the type of buzz you want when it comes to a horror film. You want to hear that kind of buzz because it gets people in seats. If you're a horror hound, that's what will get you into the seat. But yeah, I will definitely say that these are very original. Every single one. Here's what's notable here is that there are some kills that you don't see. There are some kills that happen out of your view, which is different. With a typical slasher film, they'll want to they want to relish on every single one as if that's what the whole movie's about. But the ones that they do show you, they're very creative, if you will, in terms of more or less not repeating themselves from previous films. And there is one particular one here, I think they called it the yoga kill, where you just cannot understand and believe and it is so over the top that it's probably the meat and potatoes, if you will, no pun intended, of the film. The other thing about the way that the movie is shot, you got to also remember this. This is all in the woods. So the soundtrack of the film, this is something that was very, very noticeable, which I remember happened to me with the latter part of Civil War, was the sound design. This movie the sound is fantastic because you're in the woods and it's super crazy, calm, and very naturey. And the way that the movie is shot, it uses these very long takes where not a lot of action is taking place. You're just kind of enjoying the scenery in a way, and things are taking place that are horrific, but it's happening in a beautiful scenery. So it's a really weird dynamic taking place between the two different, moods happening at the same time. Again, I cannot praise this film more. Just like Late Night with the Devil, this is another film that comes out of nowhere. The director, I'm not familiar with. I'm going to have to go dig around. His name is Chris Nash. Dig around and see, what else has he done? How did he end up in this particular film? I'm sure that this is going to be a probably franchise because it's got all the elements. It's got all the ingredients of franchise-itis, if you will. I look forward to maybe a DVD release or something where they can go a little deeper into the creation of the character, the filming, the behind the scenes, all that stuff. And a lot of that stuff I try to avoid, before seeing the movie. I do wish I would have seen it in the theater. I have a feeling in the theater it would have been even a better experience. But hell, what I got to see was right on in terms of amazing, what they did with such a simple plot that's been redone a million times. How it's a different animal completely. Our next film is A Quiet Place, Day One. Now, out of all the films we are talking about today, this is probably the one that is the most normal, if you will. And I'm talking about the more standard from all the horror films that we're talking about. And by that, I mean it's really a sci-fi horror, if you think about it. It's also a sequel. What's cool about it is there is something that I was thinking about after I saw the film is that, okay, the original Quiet Place takes place during a certain amount of time. You get the beginning and you get the end of the movie. You get some of the events in flashbacks, more or less, of what happened before, just a little bit, just a tiny little bit. But it's mainly story from beginning to end. Then on the sequel, on A Quiet Place Part 2, I think, you get a little bit of a prequel and a little bit of a sequel because it shows you how the town where Krasinski's family lives was devastated. That led to them, everybody living alone in separate places and that sort of thing. And then it's a sequel because it takes that story and pushes it forward, into the whole thing, meeting someone else and, having some of them get to that island location with the ability now to probably mass distribute this, not a cure, but a defense, a weapon, against these creatures. This movie is definitely entirely a full-blown prequel because it takes place before any of those events. I mean, time-wise, it's taking place right as it's happening. It's just taking place somewhere else. As opposed to the country, this one takes place in New York City. And it gives you that ability to do the alien invasion theme in a mass scale. The movie itself, as far as the plot goes, it centers around a woman named Sam, who's played by Lupita Nyong'o. I know I'm going to be butchering a lot of these names, or at least a few of them, who is a terminally ill cancer patient who's at a hospice facility. And she really is very angry individual, if you will, very just, she knows where she is and she knows what's going to happen to her pretty soon. She doesn't seem to get along too well with most of the other patients there or even the staff. She does have a cat that she's very close to. So that's kind of like her support system. So what happens is they take everyone out on like a field trip day to get them out of the location, go see something in the city. And with the thought of being able to get pizza, she is interested in the idea. She has no interest whatsoever in going to the city, that's for sure, to go see some kind of presentation or something. But she gets the group leader to agree that they will at least stop and get pizza on the way back, because it's something that she got it into her head and that's what she wants. So as they're watching this performance, she needs to get out and go walk outside a little bit. She's not feeling well. And all of a sudden it starts, raining these meteors, and they're coming and they're hitting things and things are blowing up. And you get this very, very 9/11-ish feel where everything is very dusty and people don't know what exactly is happening. And there's a lot of damage and devastation in terms of buildings getting hit and things getting exploding and this and that. But as you get this white dust that is just covering and floating everywhere, you start to see some kind of something moving fast and people getting eviscerated. And that gets us into the story of, okay, this is how it's going to happen. One of the things that they do here, which is very effective, especially during those scenes of the dust flying around, is that you have so many of these creatures and they're almost like a freight train. You can hear a lot of them running because they make a certain sound, and they're just kind of like destroying everything in their path, which we do later get to see without the dust. How these stampedes almost of creatures that are just, individually ripping people up, but also doing it in a different way that we haven't seen so far to this scale. Granted, this is a massive scale. This is a big city. This isn't a small town where they're just picking them off one at a time. But that's kind of how the whole thing starts. And when she's inside one of these buildings, that she gets back inside to hide in this theater that they were at, she meets up with a character named Henry, who is played by, here's another one of my butchering jobs, Demyan Honusu, or something like that. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce his name. But anyway, he was in the sequel. He was in Quiet Place Part 2. Unfortunately, he meets his end in Part 2, but he's the guy that kind of runs the island group that we meet there. And this is where she meets him. So we kind of know that at least he's going to survive this film. He's not going to survive the previous film, obviously. But anyway, that's where they kind of meet at one point, and they kind of get their rules of, okay, you got to be quiet, don't say a word, because these things apparently can hear. And everybody, little by little, starts to catch on to that. So after a while of staying indoors, hiding, they get to the point where I think the power is lost. Little by little, things start to fall apart, obviously. And the creatures are starting to work their way inside to the buildings now. So she has to leave the building as they're attacked once again. She loses even more people that she's familiar with. And in the craziness that's happening, she loses her cat. The cat runs away or something. Once she's outside, before she loses the cat, I think, she sees that the jet fighters are blowing up the bridges. This way they can, I assume, try to keep the creatures from crossing. Because I think by this point they kind of maybe figured out that the creatures cannot go in the water. Again, this is something we found out on the previous film that was the sequel. So, we found out about that trick. And here, I guess they're just trying it out. I don't know if they know for sure, but it is understood that at this point, if you can keep them isolated to the city, then they won't spread out to other parts. But, we know, the audience knows that, yes, these things are everywhere. There's no, yes, you can blow up a bridge, but still, you can still have a problem. You go to Long Island and, you cross a bridge and they're all over there. You go the other opposite direction, you go into Jersey, they're all over there. So it really doesn't matter. She's out there on her own, and we meet now a different character. We meet Eric, who is an English law student who happens to be learning abroad. He's a student here in the States, in New York City, and he basically swims out of a subway tunnel. The tunnels had flooded at some point. Something happened, obviously explosions and floods. And he kind of swims up and he's wandering through the streets in complete shock. He doesn't know what's going on. He's seen some really weird stuff, but he does encounter, out of all things in the world, the cat. So he starts just following her cat to the point where those two end up meeting. And the movie, goes through its paces of, he helps her get some medicine that she needs to keep her going. I mean, obviously the medicine is not going to save her, but at least it's going to stabilize her enough because she is terminally ill. And little by little, she is getting worse and worse. And they go through this whole adventure, which again, you should watch this movie. It's really a very good movie where they get to the point where she wants to get to a certain location. She tells them basically that she wants to get pizza. She's back to that whole pizza thing. And he is, again, because of the state of his mind, the shock that he's in, and because he's so frightened about what's happening, righteously, he's like, okay, I'll go with you. I'll do that. And she's like, no, you go do your own thing. Go. There's an evacuation point on the south side. I'm going north. You got to go south. And he's like, no, he wants to follow her. So he follows her and they go on their adventure together, hiding from these things. And you do eventually get to the point where there has to be a finale to this. She gets to that location where she wanted to get to, and the place is just burned up. It's completely destroyed, which is a blow to her, a total, complete blow to her morale, to whatever little hope she had left in her, what she wanted to accomplish. But he goes somewhere else. He takes off and then comes back with a pizza from a different pizza location that hasn't been burned down. But hey, listen. And you get to the point, by listening to the characters and her particular thing is that she just wanted to go home. And this movie is a much more emotional film, if you will. I mean, the other two are pretty emotional. The first one, especially, that ending, and even the second one. But this one is such a study of one person. And you could say that what's the meaning of the story? The story is letting a person die on their own terms, letting them deal with their death the way they want to deal with their death, to give it some meaning, to give it some hope, even if it's not for themselves, but for someone else. But it has a very cliffhangery, ending where, oh my God, is so-and-so going to make it? Is this person going to die? What's going to happen? And again, I won't spoil it for you how it ends, but it is a very satisfying end. What I didn't mention was that the character of Eric is played by Joseph Quinn, who, if you guys remember, his claim to fame was he plays Eddie at Stranger Things. I love that character. Super, super popular character. Hopefully he'll make it in some shape or form back to the final season of Stranger Things. But he's great. He's very good. I mean, the role that he's playing, he nails it, man. He's really good. And it was so much fun to watch him, do his thing. Again, great character. This was a really good movie. This is a very good movie. And I can't tell you, I can't say that, well, this one is better than the first one and the first one's better than the second and the second's better than the third. No, they're all really good movies. They are very good movies. The first and second, they're on one level because they're kind of telling more or less the same story. This is officially an offshoot. It was said, Krasinski said that they want to spin off the storyline to other areas so that they're not necessarily just continuing the same story, back to back to back to back. One of the interesting things about this movie is that they do introduce something new having to do with these creatures, because there's a scene where Eric watches as the creatures have what appears to be like hiding somewhere. It looks like a nest because it looks like there's these eggs, because we never really got to know what is the reproductive cycle of these creatures. Okay, they land on Earth, they kill everything in sight. They don't necessarily eat people. They're just killing them. So it's kind of like, okay, they're just destroying, but that's not how they feed themselves. But anyway, there's a scene where you see these weird egg-looking things and they're kind of opening them and sort of eating them. And it's like, okay, so are they creating their own food, as part of their life cycle. So we do get at first I thought it was like an egg chamber where all these little tiny little monsters will come out, but no, it wasn't that. So it is a little strange, but they are giving us these little crumbs as to the purpose. What is the point of these creatures? What do they just ravage? I mean, they don't seem to be very technological, if you will. They don't build machines to run around they just run around and destroy. That's all they do. So we are getting a little bit of that. Hopefully, we will get more of these films. I know that's supposed to be the plan if they go forward with it, but I mean, I think this one did pretty good. I hope that they continue with connecting a lot of these. How they connected the second to this one is really cool. So it's kind of like, in a way, the first is the original. The second one, I was telling my son, the second one is Godfather Part 2, because you do the prequel and the sequel at the same time. And then this third one is the prequel, the full-blown prequel. So I guess the next step would be the full-blown sequel, where you don't go back at all. But it's just very tempting to not go back. Once again, the effects are amazing. The creatures are really scary, gross-looking things. And the herd or the rampaging, stampeding aspect of how they work and they destroy in an urban environment works really well in this film in terms of giving you something new about these creatures. Definitely the type of film you want to see in a movie theater in this particular case. And it was easy this time around because obviously this is a big film, so I was able to see it in my local theater, no big deal. But definitely catch this one. Our last movie today is going to be Longlegs. And as I mentioned in the previous film, this is more like the first or the second film in terms of it being like out there, different, weird, bizarre. This is a movie about a serial killer, hunting down a serial killer. There's been a lot of comparisons to Silence of the Lambs and maybe even Seven. It's basically a young FBI agent. Her name is Lee Harker, played by Maika Monroe, who's been in a couple of other good horror films. And that she is selected to help with this hunting down of this particular serial killer because she might have some kind of psychic powers or something, or she could see things that other people can't see. Not full blown out there, but kind of like there's a possibility that she's special. And I never knew that this is something that the FBI does or looks into. I could be all fantasy for all we know, but the movie takes place in the 90s. So they're anchoring the movie at a certain point. But the movie begins with this weird looking guy approaches this girl kind of like at the front of her house. It's a very snowy field. And he starts saying some weird stuff that makes absolutely no sense. The framing is very odd because for the beginning of this film, you see almost like I don't know if you want to call it a 4:3 kind of framing, like a television kind of framing. And it's like slightly older film stock that you're looking at. I mean, it gives you that feeling of this is taking place at a different time, an earlier time. And the way that they frame the shot when you're looking at the guy is always kind of like from the nose down, so you don't see his eyes or the rest of his face. And then at a certain point, you do see his face, and you're like, holy crap. Now, I knew ahead of time that Nicolas Cage was in this, and he did play, he does play the bad guy here. But they did some weird stuff on to make him look really, really weird. One of the things that I read is that it looks like he had plastic surgery, like the character, let's say, because he looks kind of weird and kind of puffed up and kind of very super crazy white pale. His clothes, his hair, everything. So you're really dealing with something bizarre. And he tells the girl that, he came here and he wore his long legs. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it is the title of the film. And he came here to wish her a happy birthday. Okay. So that's how the movie begins. Then we move forward to the 90s where, again, because of an incident that happens where she feels something's wrong at a certain location and it turns out to be a bit of a mess, she is brought in to this other case. And in this other case, she's dealing with a situation where a serial killer, they believe to be Longlegs because this person is leaving these signs, these letters, these weird writing and all these weird stuff. But the murders are being done by family members, but he's signing them. So it's bizarre how all of these murders that are tied to this person are not being done by this person. They're being done by other family members. So I'm trying not to give you too much of the film because it's a little difficult to follow at times, especially in the beginning. But I'm going to tell you right now, when you get to the third act, if you will, when the reveals start to happen, you have the FBI agent, you have her boss, who's played by Blair Underwood. You know, if you guys remember Blair Underwood, you have her mom, played by Alicia Witt. There are some really, really scary characters in this film. And what Nicolas Cage does is just incredible. I mean, you barely see him sometimes. You just cannot wrap your mind around exactly what he is or what he's doing or what he's trying to accomplish. By the time we get to the end, it's just batshit crazy to the point where we get. But this is going to be, as far as I'm concerned, one of Nicolas Cage's best roles, non-dramatic, if you will, a genre role. This is like up there, even beyond Mandy, beyond some of his crazier stuff. This is just incredible what he does with this role. The director of the film is Oswald Perkins, who, again, I didn't realize, is the son of Anthony Perkins. So there's this genre connection, right there. I cannot, like I said before, give you enough information, but the framing of all the shots is gorgeous. The pace of the film is rather slow and it kind of builds and builds and builds. This is definitely one of these movies that I want to see again because I want to kind of mine it for more information. In other words, by the time you get to the end, okay, you kind of understand what was taking place, what everything was, and where all the pieces are. But I was still a little confused at the end. I'm doing that usual, going on the internet, searching for ending explained videos and all that kind of stuff. This is one of those films that it's going to keep you digging for a long, long time. You just want to kind of like put together everything. Like, what are Longlegs' intentions? What exactly is the plan? Are we dealing with a straight horror or are we dealing with some kind of supernatural thing here? Are we in Silence of the Lambs? Are we in Seven, or are we in something a little more bizarre than that? There's so much of that going on in the film. And as much credit as I want to give Nicolas Cage, the girl that plays the FBI agent, Maika Monroe, she's fantastic at it. She's operating at a completely different level. It's kind of like she's in her own world and Nicolas Cage is in his own world. And characters like Blair Underwood, FBI boss, he is the more normal of everybody that you kind of see interacting in the film. But man, this is a good one. And this is getting a lot of traction, obviously. It's got a good buzz. It's got an amazing Rotten Tomatoes score, the usual song and dance, similar to some of the ones that I talked about earlier. And again, when it comes to home video, I can't wait for this to be on a Blu-ray somewhere or a 4K. I mean, again, it is just the creepiest, kind of gets under your skin kind of movie. This is one that I definitely recommend you guys see. For Cage, it's amazing because this guy does like 4 or 5 movies a year. It's insane the amount of product he puts out. A lot of it is not that good. A lot of it is okay. This is top notch. This is like top-notch material for him. Technically, he's not the star of the film. He's the supporting character of the film. But, man, what a job that he does on this one. If you like those kind of serial killer movies, Here we go again. They somehow redefined it a little bit in terms of the atmosphere, the cinematography, the creep factor of it all, and then the performance that practically steals the show in a similar manner, I would say, to Silence of the Lambs, where the character of Hannibal becomes the most out there, incredible character, the standout character, if you will. As opposed to Seven, where, yes, you do get a villain that is overwhelmingly evil, but he is so demure in terms of when you finally meet him that it's kind of like the opposite of the person that you thought you were dealing with. Here, you get it all. You get the whole package. He is as insane, crazy as you think he is. He definitely delivers on that end, so definitely go and see it. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. We did a deep dive, I guess you could say, into current horror films, some of my favorite horror films from this year so far. As I mentioned earlier in the show, horror has been something that I've been kind of moving towards more and more, trying to find all those older films that I never had a chance to see originally. The roots of horror films, the subgenres of horror films. The horror category is so big. And at the same time, as I'm watching these films, I mentioned that I've been reading My Heart is a Chainsaw, and through that book, there are so many references to horror films that I've been compiling. I was able to find a list of most or all of the references that are in this book. And now I'm in the process of trying to see all the movies I have not seen that are referenced in this book. But these 4 films that we just talked about, again, I cannot gush enough over them. Very different, all 3 of them. Different subgenres of horror, as I mentioned. Definitely the kind of films that once they put them out on video, I'm there. I want to see them again. I did already order Late Night with the Devil, but the other 3 are still kind of newish, so we're going to have to wait a little while longer before they start announcing their home video marketing, for those Blu-rays or 4Ks. There will be more. As a matter of fact, there are more this year that I have on my list of films I want to watch. So maybe at some point we'll return and hit a couple of more of those films. So on behalf of everyone here, thank you for listening, and we will see you soon here at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Don't move.
Is it scary being an FBI agent?
The letter was left with the bodies. We have 10 letters like it over the past 30 years. And all of them signed with one word: Longlegs.
He'll kill. And kill again.
There she is! You could have been nice with me, but you didn't.
Put the gun down!
Now that has led to all of this.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perone, copyright 2024.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.